Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got a great webinar ahead. We're really glad that you're here with us. From surviving to thriving, opportunities in a challenging labor market, and that's to say the least. You have come to the right place, and no better person to talk about these things than the president of Engage to Excel Recruitment Solutions, Darren Findley. We're going to turn it over to him in just a minute. Before we do that, some housekeeping items. Standard webinar fare. Yes, we are recording this, although we're glad you're here live with us today. And we will make the recording available tomorrow. So thank you again for being here. If you do have questions related to what Darren is sharing with us today, then we will definitely get to those. We might even get to them in the moment. I might jump in and interrupt Darren if I think it's a timely question. You can present those via the Q&A part of the Zoom dashboard and or the chat too, which is what I've been having you all share when I was asking you where you're at today in the chat. So either one, we'll monitor both. But again, if there are questions about, and actually, Darren, there is a question that does always come up, are these slides that we're going to be able to share with them besides the recording?
We sure can, yes.
Okay. Because that's a question that does arise. So we'll make sure to, so that's letting everybody know that. So I'm going to go ahead and go in the background right now. Again, if you do have a timely question as he's presenting, we might try to get him in there. Otherwise, we'll take them questions at the end too. So Darren Findley, president of Engage to Excel Recruitment Solutions, welcome.
Thanks, Kevin. And just want to say thank you to you and the talent board for inviting me today. And of course, we love the work that you're doing around the candidate experience. We're a global underwriter, the talent board, and always like to be involved in everything that you're doing. So thank you for that. And I also want to say thank you to our friends at Labor IQ, have given me a lot of the data that I use today, as well as Dr. Jack Wiley, our chief data scientist, and he oversees our Trendicators research group that provides a lot of the data as well. And then special shout out and recognition to Melissa and our marketing group at E2E, and she helped put the slides together. Just always does a fantastic job. So thank you. So to Melissa and Dr. Jack and to Kevin. You know, it has been a crazy year. And when I think back on my career in recruiting, probably 30 plus years now, I don't know that I've seen anything like the last couple of years. We've seen recessions, we've seen ups and downs, but I think that we can all admit that the last couple of years we were just surviving, trying to figure it out and get through it. And so as we go into 2023, and with the whole craze around chatbots and chat GTP, I was really curious, what can artificial intelligence help us with right now? So I've been just so curious about how that works and trying to learn a little bit about it, you know, here and there. And so I asked the question, well, what will happen to the labor market in 2023 to try to get some insights? And it was interesting. This was the exact answer that I got. It's difficult to predict exactly what will happen in the labor market in 2023. It's influenced by a wide range of factors, including economic conditions, technological changes, and government policies. Well, that's the understatement of the day, but it was very true on one hand. And you saw even in the title, we kind of just used this in the title. We'll do a webinar some other day around artificial intelligence and chatbots that are out there and their impact, but definitely is going to be influencing what we do in human resources and influencing what we do in recruiting immediately and in years to come. So it's going to be interesting to watch that. But today we're going to talk about the labor market and try to move from the survival mode to thriving mode. But to start, I want to take a quick recap of 2022. You know, it actually was one of the strongest labor markets on record. And you look at some of these numbers here at the bottom, you know, there were over 76 million hires that occurred last year. And overall, there were significant job gains to the economy, that added jobs to the economy, 4.5 million net new jobs. And, you know, President Biden was on a couple of weeks ago, actually, just touting how great it's been with all these job gains that we've gotten. And yes, a lot of those job gains were recovery from the pandemic, a lot of new jobs created as the economy continued to pick up steam and expand post-pandemic. And then you kind of look across and say, well, last year, the employment rate ended at 3.5%, extremely low. And the labor force participation rate and the number of people in the labor force had actually dropped below pre-pandemic numbers by 102,000. So pretty significant challenges that occurred last year in the labor market itself. So as you look at these two numbers, the two on the left tells you how busy you were. If you're involved in HR, onboarding, recruiting, it doesn't matter. You had a very, very busy year in 2022. The two numbers on the right, that tells you how hard it was. Extremely tight employment market as we exited last year and got into this year. So I think as we think about 2023, here's just a snapshot of January. There are still 11 million open jobs, and that number has been that way for several, almost 18 months now. We've been over 10 million open jobs every single month. January was kind of this spike in hiring, the surge in hiring, over 500,000 new jobs that were added. It's higher than the monthly average gain of 400,000. It's far higher than the estimate of 187,000 that all the economists that kind of thought was going to happen based on what was going on around inflation and price increases. So this surge in jobs that is happening there, that happens despite the Fed's continued efforts to kind of tamp down the economy and maybe slow it down a little bit. And we'll talk about that in their interest rates that have been occurring. But we continue to see a very high, elevated number of monthly quits. Over 4 million people have changed jobs. And it's interesting when you look at, we've been talking about this for, I don't know, probably 15 or more, maybe even 20 years, that the younger generations will have a lot more jobs than the older generations had in their career. When I think about my parents, they both had basically one job their entire career. For between 25 and 35 years, they were at one organization throughout their entire career. When you think about those that are 55 to 64, they've been staying on average 9, almost 10 years. But those workers that are 25 to 34, they're staying on average 2.8 years. And so there's a lot more changing of careers, changing of jobs, a lot more churn. And I don't expect that to change. I don't expect that to go away anytime soon. Unemployment actually ticked down even a little bit lower in January, which is, again, a little surprising. Is at 3.4%. That's the lowest it's been in 53 years, since 1969. So that just kind of tells you that it's still extremely tight. We look at wages from a snapshot standpoint, they rose a little bit again in January, and year over year, about 4.4% increase overall. And the labor force participation rate, it edged just slightly higher in January than it has been, but it's been kind of this 62% range for months now, which just tells us that it should be getting higher. We'll talk a little about that as the economy continues to grow and the population grows, but we're just not seeing that quite yet. So the labor market's tight. No big surprise, I'm sure, to anybody that's on this call. As we think about 2023, we want to think about really three things that are going to impact the labor market as we go forward. It really is this inflation control issue and what the Fed's going to do, the lack of available talent, and what we call this reversion to norms and what's going to be happening in the workplace itself and the future of work and how people work. And so this inflation on the left-hand side, you'll see this rapid increase of interest rates. We'll talk about those industries impacted. We've talked about, kind of the labor market. We'll spend some more time on that, but the lack of labor force really is actually hindering productivity. It's hindering our growth, and it does overall impact the economy and the GDP as we think about it. And then this reversion to norms, this shift back to pre-pandemic behavior, whether it's encouraged, maybe forced by your employer, or the demands of certain type of talent that changes along the way from one industry to another. So we'll really talk about these three things. And when you think about the interest rate and the Federal Reserve overall, and I've got a lot of respect for the Federal Reserve, they've got a very, very tough
Hey, Darren,
time.
sorry, really quick. Before we move on to this part, somebody did ask, and sorry that I interrupted, but somebody asked about the age demographic of 35 to 54. Are you finding, and do you have data on that? On how long they're staying in jobs, if we're talking about the younger generations with multiple jobs?
I don't have the precise data on that, Kevin. So whoever asked it, thank you for that. We'll do some more research if we can't find it. It was not in the data set that I pulled here. I would guess just intuitively that somewhere in between the 2.8 and the 9.8.
Got it.
Somewhere in the middle there. But yeah, we don't have the data on that yet. So thanks,
Darren.
Yeah. And Kevin, don't let me go on a roll without, if other questions pop up, jump in.
Sure,
Okay?
I'll get you. Don't worry. I get you.
Good deal. So you think about the Federal Reserve, like I said, they have a really tough job overall, and they have really two imperatives. One is to maintain monetary supply stability, in other words, control inflation. And the second part of their role is to maintain maximum employment in the labor market. And it's hard to imagine that those things are mutually exclusive. They're not. They're actually intertwined significantly. But when inflation began to get really rapidly increasing after we're coming out of the pandemic, one of the things that they had to do pretty quickly is begin raising interest rates to try to calm down the economy and maybe slow it down a little bit. You've heard a lot of commentary around the impact of these rising interest rates. But when you look at the trajectory and really the velocity with which they increase the interest rates, that 2022 blue bold line there on the left, faster than they've done since the 70s, even since like 1988, very rapid pace of interest rate increases. So again, trying to slow down the economy, slow down inflation, but the impact on that on the labor force and the workforce is evident in what happens to your mortgages, the interest rates going up, what happens to your car loans and how much you have to spend on your car payment now, what happens to your credit card payments. They are highly associated with the interest rates. So if you haven't checked your credit card statement lately, you should go back and compare 2 years ago interest to interest today. It will be significantly different. It'll freak you out and hopefully encourage you to pay off a credit card bill because it's crazy. But those things impact HR because it impacts your employees. It impacts how far their paycheck goes, how they can spend their discretionary income, and has them think about what they're doing with their compensation and their career overall. So this interest rate is a big piece of what's going on in the labor market itself. And we talked about mortgage rates specifically. When the interest rates started going up really fast in 2022, we saw job losses in these categories on the left: building supply, construction, real estate appraisal, leasing, lending, all of these, furniture and home stores, all of these that impacted is that new home construction really came to a halt and new home sales really took a dive year over year. And so it started to pick back up a little bit as interest rates moderated the last few months. But then I just heard this past week that they're going to be doing some more upticks because, again, the economy is so hot, we may see another impact on those sectors. On the other hand, last year, we saw job gains. We saw job gains in manufacturing. We saw the pent-up demand from restaurants and hotels and event management. That picked up quite a bit. And so a lot of job gains around those things. I thought that men's clothing stores job gains was interesting because during the pandemic, we all worked from home and stayed home and didn't need that new jacket or new suit or new tie. But again, with people getting back on the road and traveling, you see more and more of the men's clothing stores picking up as how they're hiring as well. So really interesting dichotomy between the two. What we're also seeing along the way is we're seeing people move from, this one sector that might have lost jobs. There's still so many open jobs. It's very easy for them to move over into other sectors along the way. But the labor market remains tight. So 3.4% unemployment this past month, and it doesn't really tell the whole story. Different sectors and subsectors that you'll see here have much lower unemployment. It makes it much more difficult to hire in business and finance, architect and engineering, healthcare practitioners and nursing, management and legal. It's just, very, very difficult. So as you're thinking about your marketing strategy for your hiring programs, you've got to think about not just where is it locally, but what are the jobs that you're looking at and what is the supply and demand of the jobs that are critical for your business. And digging down to each of these subsectors is really, really important because the national unemployment rate doesn't always tell the story. It's gone on for a while. We can go back and look at this, and this is kind of just a long timeline of when it's gone up and when it's gone down. It's very highly correlated to recessions and some economic slowdowns across the way. But you can just tell that for several months.
Darren, Darren, it's me again. And this time, actually, I have a question because there's always there's other things under the hood, right? So, but what you were sharing around unemployment, and I'm just curious if you had any data about the underemployed, because we're talking about, again, a tight labor market, underemployed, and even those that have removed themselves completely still out of the labor market, right? Because there's still a good chunk of folks that have not come back since the pandemic has been waning. So any thoughts on that?
I have some thoughts, and I actually have a slide for that.
Okay, good. Okay.
So absolutely, I'll get to that just in a few slides.
You go ahead. You just keep going.
All right. That's good. I'm glad you brought it up. That way I won't forget to address it when we get there. But again, between this historically low unemployment and inflation at 40-year highs, what we're beginning to see, what we saw last year really, were significant gaps in compensation. And so we'll talk about the impact of inflation on compensation, the impact on inflation in the labor market itself, as well as the availability of the talent pool. But you can see out of the last 830 months, only 10 have had unemployment below 3.5%, dating back to November of 53, back when Kevin was just learning how to play the drums. Probably wasn't that long ago, Kevin, but anyway.
That was a long time before me still, but there you go. Thank you.
It's a long time ago, right? So it's a tight market, and we'll talk about that, but it's not tight. It's tight everywhere. So this is just a good view. If the national average, is 3.5%, you can see there are certain markets around the country where it's significantly below 3.5%, and some markets where it's much higher. So as an HR practitioner and as a recruiter, and you think about the options that you have or where your operations may be around the country, you've got to take the impact of location. Just like in real estate, location is really important. And depending on how much of your workforce is remote, you may or may not have opportunities to go, hey, if it's really 4.3 in Los Angeles or 3.4 in Dallas versus in Austin, can I go to different markets to find the talent that I'm looking for overall? So it's important to understand in the job families that you have, what that unemployment rate is, the market that you're in, what that employment rate looks like, and where you can go versus the mean or the norm in the U.S. overall. And so Kevin asked about missing labor in the market and underemployed. And I think this really interesting trajectory that we were on pre-pandemic. We were about 164 million individuals in the labor market, in the workforce, that were participating. And then you can see the big drop there had dropped out with a lot of the layoffs and the 14 million unemployed that happened pretty quickly, right when the pandemic happened. But I think what's also happened is that we've seen this phenomenon of working age men out of the workforce, underemployed, unemployed individuals in the workforce. And you think back to the 1950s, I'm looking at my notes to make sure I get it right here, Kevin. Back in the 1950s, only 1 out of 50 working age men were out of the workforce. Now it's 1 out of 10. That's a significant difference of underemployed out of the labor market completely that we need to all try to get back into the labor force. The causes are anything from substance abuse, becoming caregivers, giving up on finding the right job with the right skill sets that they have. But men without college degrees have actually seen their adjusted wages go down by 17%. So stop and think about that for a second. With inflation going up, if you don't have a college degree and you're a male, many times what you're seeing is this gradual decrease in your buying power, and your wages are going down relative to the overall cost of living. Men with college degrees have seen their overall compensation rise by 20%. And so this gap between college degree, non-college degree is a real problem. And when you think about the trades that are trying desperately to hire individuals, this is an untapped market. Mike Rowe did a segment about 2 months ago now, and I love Mike Rowe. We've done some work together when I was back in my Conexa days, and he came and presented at one of our conferences. He was the guy that did Dirty Jobs, if you remember him on TV. He's estimated there are about 7 million men that are out of the labor market today that are just unemployed, not able to find work, not able to find the right work. So there's a lot of complicating factors around that, but there's certainly a number. This shows 2 million below what we expected it to be. But when you add the 7 million that are either underemployed, Kevin, to your point, or unemployed, there's a pretty significant gap of folks that are missing out of the labor force.
Hey, Darren, somebody was asking the source for that data that you were just sharing from the earning powered wage gap data.
Yes, that came from Labor IQ.
Got it. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And then the other things, those are all pretty negative numbers, right? On the positive side, what we have seen is the return of women into the workforce. So as of this past month, the women now account for over 50% of the labor force. It had dropped during the pandemic. It had just gotten to 50% pre-pandemic and had dropped during the pandemic. Now it's back up to 50% where it was. Growth in healthcare, education, hospitality has helped fuel all those. And also, as of last month, 14% of construction roles were held by women. That's the highest number ever in the construction industry that are held by women overall. So you've got this issue, right? You've got these millions that are missing from the labor force. The labor market's really tight, and you've got this churn that's occurring overall. And when you think about this labor force change by state, again, going back to location, and you may think, well, hey, this is kind of high level, it's kind of broad, but it's really not, because it was interesting in the chat. You go back and look at all the different locations that are listed there. It's important that a lot of times labor is local, and you have to really understand what your local labor market has, especially for customer-facing kind of roles and front-facing roles and jobs that you have that require teams to be together. But this is a nice graphical of the top, the highs and the lows of the different states and the changes in the number of individuals in the labor force. So when you look at Idaho and Utah and Oregon, they've had increases in the amount of people in the labor force mostly due to net new migration to those states. But other states like Minnesota, Maine, New York, Vermont, and Maryland have seen a decrease in overall labor force availability. That is going to impact everything from your wages, from the time to fill, from even finding the labor in your state overall. And you couple that.
Hey, Darren.
Yes.
A couple of things. This is great that we've got a lot of interactivity today too. So everybody, thanks for posting these questions. Just, I think there was a related one that I missed, but somebody's asking again about the time frame, the time period of of this gap, wage gap between men with and without college degrees. Was that pre-pandemic that we're measuring that data? Do you know through?
It is. It is. That
okay.
Time frame goes back to 2001 for the wages.
Got it.
Okay. The 7 million that Mike Rowe refers to as the men that are out goes back to 2015 to present.
Got it.
Go to 2022. Yeah,
thank you. That was definitely one of those areas. And just something I think I wanted to ask, because I mean, you might have seen the same number, but I think, I mean, we also have to remember that it's still only about maybe 30% of the workforce that actually can be remote. I mean, right. It's most of us. That's why this is so important while you're sharing.
Right.
Yeah.
And the stat that I've actually pulled from Labor IQ is that 25% of the workforce, very close to your 30.
Got
right?
it. So 25. Yeah, I've heard 30, but yeah, got it.
So people, when you look at the media or you talk to your friends and your neighbors and colleagues, everyone thinks that there's all these people that are working remote. Well, really, they're mostly working either hybrid or they're working on premise somewhere. There's only 25% actually are remote, according to BLS data. So let's talk about just for a second what we think is going to happen in this year of 2023. And when we do that, we kind of compare that to what happened in the past. And so if you look down at the bottom number says historical average. This is from 2016 to 2021. The average historical number of job openings was 76 million during that time. The number of hires during that time was about 66 million, and the number of quits was 38 million. Last year was unique. Last year, everything got accelerated and it saw an increase across the board. So you went from a historical average of 76 million to 119, and then the number of hires jumped up to 75 million, and the number of quits also accelerated to 46 million. So what we think, and just again, trying to understand what's going to happen in the labor market this year, based on some slight loosening or slight increases that we believe are going to happen in the unemployment rate, and employment rate increasing is today a positive thing as it loosens up the labor market, doesn't keep it so tight, right? That the number of job openings we think is going to moderate to about 102 million. We do think there's going to continue to be a ton of hiring that occurs. So really almost 64 million hires that will occur, and there's still going to be churn. Maybe not as bad as it was last year, but basically reversing back to kind of normal churn that we saw between 16 and 22 of 38.5 million people churning in their jobs that they're in. And so this is important to continue to think about, what does that mean? When you look at this chart, it kind of gives you that historical perspective. You have monthly gains above the line and years where you had decreases in jobs overall below the line. And on the far right-hand side, you can kind of see the net, plus and minus. We think it's going to be somewhere between 100,000 jobs a month will be gained, or about 50,000 jobs a month will be lost. Well, let me just tell you, January blew that out. And that's not uncommon when you look at what happens on each. There's only about 3 or 4 months a year you see big spikes. Part of that's holiday seasonality, part of it's a summer surge and things like that. But there's still some seasonality in there, but we still believe that on average, we'll probably average out conservatively 100,000 jobs a month, or worst case scenario, lose about 50,000 jobs a month as we go out through the next part of this year.
Hey, Darren, real quick. There a question that came in before, but this is still all interrelated too.
Yep.
When you were showing the changes in labor force distribution or percentages by state, is that have to do with, I mean, especially post-pandemic, the people moving to new states? I mean, or
yeah, it does.
Yeah, that's primarily because I know, right? Because I know that there's been an exodus. Like, I'm in California, right? And I know that the population definitely has changed in statewide as well, especially in the Bay Area too, and have gone to other states. So that's merely what we're talking about, right? Kind of a labor move.
Yeah, I think these are labor moves. This is net increases in labor force in those states, and there are really 3 things that cause that. One is the availability of jobs. You got to think about, well, why are these jobs available? And the incentives that those states provide, both for organizations and individuals, drive a lot of that. So when you think about Tennessee, Florida, Texas, they are very, they have no personal income tax. So you get Fed tax, but not state tax on your personal income. And so there's some high incentives there that, hey, if I can work remote, or if there's jobs there, I'll move into those states because I don't pay as much in taxes.
Got it. Thank you, Darren.
Yep. And I think that when you look at this forecast from a hiring standpoint, really kind of across the board, you just see everybody in all these areas are still going to be hiring. There's still going to be over 13 million jobs in professional. The trades, transport, and utilities, almost 13 million. Hospitality, healthcare, 7 million jobs. Manufacturing still going to be hiring. So all of these different categories are going to be hiring as we go into this next year. So when you think about what does the forecast look like, there's kind of this pessimistic view. And when you think about this pessimistic view, it is probably a net loss of jobs. So think about it, if they continue to raise interest at the rate that they raised interest rates last year to try to slow down and tamp down the economy, it will create more unemployment. It could create more layoffs. And if that happens, this net loss of jobs will occur. You'll see this broad-based recession, most likely, and this broad-based layoffs. Today, we're only seeing layoffs in mostly IT, some corporate senior jobs I've heard are being laid off, but not a widespread mass layoff by industry other than just kind of the IT sector and tech sector. There's reasons for that. We think that the impact will be felt early this year. So I think you're going to hear more about it the first half of the year, maybe into the early to mid-summer, and then hopefully that'll hit bottom mid to late summer, and then job gains begin to come back toward the end of the year. That's kind of the pessimistic view. When you think about, well, okay, that doesn't sound too bad, and it's really not too bad, honestly. It's like better than it could be. But on the positive side, a very optimistic view of what could happen in the labor market, there could be 1.2 million new jobs. Remember, 100,000 jobs a month kind of adds up to 1.2 million jobs. That the economy doesn't really go into a recession, and the Fed pulls off something that's never happened before, which is a soft landing, which we're keeping our fingers crossed on. And the interest rate impacts are constrained to just a few industries. And the backlog of these open jobs, 11 million jobs we have, are being filled now by not just the 5 million that are unemployed, but a few more people coming into that. So that backlog comes down minimizing losses in the labor market overall. I listened to Michelle Meyer at MasterCard. She was at Bank of America before that. She's one of the economists that I listened to from a consumer economic standpoint. And her point this week was that the consumer is not dead. Yes, they're not buying eggs as often as they were at $9 a carton, but they're still buying eggs and they're still spending money. And travel is crazy ridiculous. If you've flown any of the last several months, you've seen the travel side of the economy continue to just go crazy with travel. Spring breakers in Nashville this year. I live in Nashville, so they're predicting the busiest record week in 2 weeks in Nashville were spring breakers. Wait a second. I thought spring breakers went to the beach. I thought they went to California and Florida. Now they're going to come, I guess, to Nashville this year and get down on Lower Broadway, but not me. But again, the consumer spending money. And the other thing that's impacting a lot of these optimistic scenarios, if you remember back in 2021, they passed the infrastructure package of the federal government. It's taken several months for that to pick up and go. And when I've flown in my entire career for the last 30 years, it's generally been about 60% business travelers, white collar business travelers, probably 20% families and 20% blue collar. Well, that has shifted significantly. It's probably 60% blue collar travelers. Every other person that gets on the flight these days is carrying a hard hat. It is so interesting. Once I heard about it, I started watching for it, and that phenomenon has been going on even more. And we see that. Also, what you see is the family travel has gone up a lot. And then the business, white collar travel, because a lot of us can work remote, just not traveling quite as much as we were. So just interesting scenario between the pessimistic and the optimistic scenario. So part of that optimistic scenario is that wage growth should come down just a little bit. That's optimistic on the organization side, right? It had to deal with significant wage increases over the last several years and trying to meet that need that you have, try to compete for talent that you're trying to do. That really has created a lot of swirl in the marketplace. And it has created this, again, we're not quite to where we are from an inflation standpoint. Look at overall inflation last year being as high as 9% in the middle of the year. Now it's averaging around 6.5% to 5.5%. Wages aren't quite there, but we still believe that it's going to impact hiring overall. And so companies paying below this is going to be a risk. And inflation could pull, again, as inflation continues to stay steady or go up, it could pull more people into the labor market. But wages have a big impact on what we see in the marketplace as this turnover.
Hey, Darren, just a related question because and again, you may or may not have a direct answer for this, but you were just talking about that economist that you like to listen to about consumer spending. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is true, right? I mean, I've seen some other things too, that consumer spending hasn't ebbed that much overall, right? I mean, and it's still pretty strong, and you still have the competitive wage pressure. I mean, that combined with, the feds are going to keep raising interest rates. I don't know. I hope that doesn't slide to the pessimistic column, but it's just a bizarre place, right?
It's very bizarre. And when you try to, again, I think all the economists have kind of gotten squeamish about forecasting of what it may or may not be or what it could be. And
right.
And that's the interesting part is you have to, here's what I think, Kevin, you have to kind of know what's going on. You got to stay in tune. It's not a one and done kind of thing. That's why I enjoy, digging into this, because it changes every single month. And sometimes it's big changes, sometimes it's subtle changes, but it is constantly evolving, and it helps us help our clients really evolve their recruiting strategy.
Sure.
And, everything back from gift cards to interview to sign-on bonuses or whatever it happens to be, you have to think about that in relation to the market overall and your labor force. And when I think about, again, also kind of what we do around find and keep, it's not just about finding the labor in those labor markets, it's about keeping who you have. And this chart, it just kind of really shows you where a lot of the highest quit rates are across the country overall, where some of the highest quit totals are. Well, the quit totals is always really a fair way to look at it, because it's also highly correlated with the population. Okay, so I just got to point that out, right? You got California, Texas, Florida, highly populated states, they are obviously going to have the higher quit rates. But we look at the national quit rate average of 2.7%, and this is per month. Okay, so let that soak in just for a second. 2.7% is the turnover rate, really per month. Then you begin to compare that to some of these states that have 4% in Idaho, 4% in Alaska, Montana, Wyoming. It does impact overall your ability to retain the people that you have based on the jobs that are there and the labor force increasing there overall. So you have to take those things into account. And then to dig a little deeper in that, even, you have to think about what happens in your industry overall. So when you begin to look at this quit rate in the industry against the 2.7 average in the nation, against these different industries, how are you doing? Are you above the line or are you below the line? What are the total quits look like? And this turnover continues to remain elevated, and the competition for talent continues to be there. And so I think that we began to see individuals, and we absolutely saw them switching jobs for increased compensation. Now, the grass wasn't always greener on the other side of the fence, but many times the compensation impact was significant. I want to talk a little bit about that, because all the business today are struggling with where should our pay rates be, how do we remain competitive, and what happens when we bring people back into the market overall. And I think when you look at just kind of a summary of that, what you'll see is that there was an impact, that individuals that stayed in their job probably didn't make as much as individuals that switched jobs, the switchers. When I was growing up, a switcher is what my mom used when I was misbehaving, as a switcher. But today, switchers are those that are changing jobs more often, right? And we see that this difference is significant. I'm going to show you an example of that in a second, but that premium for switching really skyrocketed last year. And this is according to the Atlanta Fed. They're watching that. They also believe that the lower end of the market is driving a lot of this. And so you've seen everybody from Walmart to Amazon to McDonald's increase our minimum pay from where it might have been 12 or 10 or 13 an hour up to 17 and 20, in some cases 22 an hour. That's a pretty significant increase. And so you do see individuals, especially on the lower end of those markets and those wage categories, they're still losing talent. And if they don't get competitive on wages, they'll continue to lose talent. So you don't have to overpay. You don't have to be an outlier. But you must remain competitive.
Darren, and that's always sometimes like, that's might be not as easy as even threading a needle, right? But here's a question though that relates to that. Given that the GDP in 2019 was 21, I don't know why I'm not understanding this 21T. What's the T stand for? What is that referencing? Trillion. Thank you. Sorry, I totally drew a blank on that. 2019, 21 trillion. Last year, it broke 25.4 trillion with less workforce participation. And so the question is, does that mean, and do you think that means the industry can absorb higher wages?
Yes and no. What also drove a lot of the GDP increase year over year was the increase in prices. And inflationary prices also drove a lot of the increase in GDP overall. There was certainly some of that as recovery, but a lot of that was price increases from inflation that drove higher GDP.
Thanks, Darren.
So the economists are saying.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. And we're in the home stretch now, right, Darren? Yep.
Good deal. So I want to give you an example of what happens when someone stays and goes, and not to kind of belabor this point, and this is kind of a higher level. It's like for a data scientist, and I want to thank my friends at Labor IQ for helping with this. But when you think about someone in 2020, maybe they're making a 110 in their role, and the people that stay got a slight merit increase. They bumped up to 115. The switchers got a more significant increase, almost 9-10%. Well, they jumped up in 2021 then to 119. Well, as that continued to go the next year, the stayer got another increase, a merit increase, bumped up to 120. The switcher that switched the first year stayed. They got a little bit of a merit increase to 124. If they switched again, it jumped up to 130. And so when people stay in their jobs, their pay not be keeping up with the market rate, and the market rate now has jumped up. So now for everyone in compensation, the problem you have really is internal equity. And how you have someone at 130 and someone at 120, that's a real problem. And we were talking this week at one of our customers about boomerangers and how good it was to bring them back in. But if you don't bring them back in with pay transparency, you're going to end up losing them. They double the retention rate of non-boomerang hiring employees. But you also have to make sure that you engage them, you train them, you orient them just like everyone else, but you also have wage transparency along the way. So I don't think that we're at the end of the road on this. This job switching has been driving pay gaps along the way. It's going to be something that our compensation and our modeling and our forecasting and all of our organizations are going to have to keep in mind when we begin to budget each year. And no one has ever budgeted for that kind of pay increase. Maybe Home Depot did it this year. They said they're going to put $1 billion into paying their associates more. And so that's a real positive thing for those associates. It's also forward thinking. We've got to get in front of this from a wage standpoint and make sure that we understand, how we can impact the market overall. We do think that wage growth is going to be tampered down a little bit at the high end, will not grow as much as it has been. But again, those at the lower levels of the market are still going to have to think about having to hire their replacements at a higher rate than they were before. So having a good way to think about that is important. And again, we think about find and keep all the time, and we think about the candidate experience and the new hire experience. And so I wanted to share some just quick, facts with you around that experience of the candidate early on as they begin to enter your workforce. And this interaction, this employee interaction and getting to know someone at your organization on the left-hand side is really critical. 71% of the candidates said they wanted to have interaction with multiple individuals and employees in your organization before an offer. 74% after the offer, but before day one, still crave to have more conversation and interaction. And during the onboarding and certainly after onboarding, they want to have that communication going. But the important thing about thinking about your first day is really critical. So we know that about 74% of the respondents to our Trinicator survey, which by the way, we're in the process of doing now, that's going to come out in April and May of this year. So looking forward to sharing the new perspectives that the job seekers are going to be sharing with us. But from this 2022 survey, their first day experience impacts their decision to stay for the next month. Think about that for a second. My first day is going to help me decide, am I going to stay here for the next month? 72% said that total onboarding experience, so whether your onboarding experience is a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that impacts their decision to stay for that first year. And then we also know that 67% responded that personalized welcome gift or some kind of onboarding gift has a huge impact on them to accept your offer and continue to come through. I want to share one more fun stat, a couple more fun stats with you before we wrap up, is that 67% increase in first day show rates with organizations that begin to send these welcome gifts to someone's home, as opposed to just giving to them on their first day, and 42% reduction in first 90-day turnover. So create a great experience. You have all this trouble finding these people. You got a super tight labor market. Make sure you create a great experience for their first day, for their onboarding experience. Not only do you get them to start, then you can keep them and reduce your early turnover overall. And then last but not least, so what now, right? I think there's like what I call it the 3 A's. There's really 3 things. Number one is adaptability. The labor market is going to change again. We're going to see something in 3 months that we haven't seen yet. We're going to be scratching our heads going, how did this happen? So adaptability is going to be key. Don't go to sleep at the wheel. It's not going to be as crazy as it was last year, but there's still going to be 64 million hires this next year. But I think the landscape could look a lot different as it was. I think inflation will get under control to some degree. We may still see interest rates go up. That's going to impact the overall labor market. So adaptability is going to be key. Number 2 is ask. Ask your stakeholders what their challenges are. And you go, well, that's super simple. Well, you also need to listen to what they say. Understand your business. If you're in HR, if you're in recruiting, you need to understand your business as well as your business leaders do. Ask them what their challenges are. Understand what their goals are overall. And look, become educated in your labor market so you can help educate them. Understand what the labor force participation rate is in your market. Understand what employment's doing in your market. Understand what wages are doing in your industry. Be educated on that so you can provide guidance and be, the last A is an advisor. Be an advisor to your stakeholder to stand out to them as a trusted advisor. And you got to just kind of change your mindset now. Going, we were surviving the last couple of years, and now let's thrive. Let's take this data, let's use it, and now let's thrive in the marketplace overall. So that was fast and furious, and I know I ran through it really quickly, but I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that anyone had. Thanks for asking them along the way. But Kevin, thanks for having me on. And
yeah, Darren,
do some
thank
questions
you.
and wrap it up.
Thanks so much. So we've got to take a few questions real quick though. We're going to post in the chat. You were referencing data from Labor IQ, and what's exciting for everybody, and we'll send this out to you all tomorrow too, along with the slides from Darren and the recording, is we have a virtual March conference coming up March 22nd and 23rd. And our first day, the speaker, who is the chief analytics and economist at Labor IQ, is Jay Denton, is going to be speaking. So he's going to be our opening keynote. Ron just posted that link. It is free to attend and register. So we highly recommend that you check that out. We've got a lot of other great sessions coming too for that. So there was another question, Darren, that the majority of our employees work on premises. This is what the person's stating. We provide welcome gifts on day one. Would you recommend shipping the welcome gift to the employee's home? This person works in healthcare.
Absolutely.
There's your answer. Boom, right there.
Think about it like this. In healthcare specifically, we do know this, is that 67% of the people that accept your offer will also get a competing offer between the time they accept yours and the time they start. So if you're waiting to day one to give them that welcome gift, that's a great welcome experience, but they're also considering other offers before they start. Lock them in early. Lock them in before they start.
Got it. Excellent. I totally agree with that. And a lot of what you're saying, we definitely see that in our benchmark research too, about, retention starts before day one. So boom. Hey, another question that candidate experience is extremely important. Employee experience obviously is as well. Retention across the board. To be able to improve let's say an employee leaves, their willingness to come back. Do you have any data around that, and in regards to what some call the boomerang effect, right? That it can be important, especially because you don't want to lose that knowledge base, and maybe sometimes they do come back, right? I know a lot of the and in accounting, a lot of the big four accounting firms have really good boomerang programs. So what thoughts on that? So
the question was around data. I got a lot of thoughts around it, but here's the data points that I know off the top of my head, is that organization-wide only hire about 5.7% of their hires are boomerangs.
Okay.
Very, very small.
Yeah,
okay?
small. Yeah.
There's a big opportunity there, okay? The other thing that we know is that boomerangers that come back and start have double the retention rate of non-boomerangers. Okay?
Yeah.
And if you think about the average cost per hire is anywhere between $6,000 and $9,000 or whatever it is in your industry, right? That impact of someone that's boomeranging and coming back and then staying is huge.
Yeah.
Plus the anecdotal pieces of them understanding the business, understanding the culture, understanding, what they're getting into, speed to productivity, all big pluses.
Yeah. That's great. Thanks, Darren. Another question, any insight into talent retention strategy outside of just higher compensation?
Well, I've got an opinion on it, but I'm also probably biased. I'll tell you that. We have just seen when you use recognition as a retention tool, it does amazing things. And it can be as simple as starting out with birthdays and anniversaries, but then expanding it toward safety and special projects and impact. And it doesn't have to all be monetary either. It can be non-monetary recognition. But we know if that manager knows how to recognize and make that recognition really appropriate, timely, and exact, like whatever they're recognizing for, you did a great job on this project, saving this much money, involving your teammates, that drives retention as much as anything else will, other than compensation.
Yep. Agreed indeed. Let's take another question, and if anybody else has another one, definitely please post. And so Darren, the other thing that I wanted to ask is burnout is quite real. And you touched on this a little bit in regards to, the fluidity in the labor force and people leaving and not coming back either, right? So, I mean, and can you highlight again, or about, is there an increase of workers leaving one industry particularly and then working in another industry, and not just, I mean, those that are coming back actually? Because burnout is a real thing. We see it in TA and HR too, big time, the past 2 years. So.
Yeah, the burnout is real. I think we're in the process of looking into that from a data standpoint. So I don't have any data on people changing. There is some data that's out there, and I need to go find it, Kevin, around where people are going. And I think LinkedIn is the one that has it. And it says where they're going, they're leaving this industry and going to that industry.
Right.
So we're in the process of digging into that a little bit to understand it. But there is some data out there that shows that someone in IT is going into, I'll make it up, manufacturing. Someone from hospitality is now going into healthcare. That is absolutely happening. We know it's happening with IT for sure, but we think it's happening across the board when you see high levels of burnout. And a lot of the burnout's occurring not just because the job is hard or I'm having to work extra hours, it's because they're short staffed.
Right.
And that short staff, I mean, that's driving a lot of the burnout overall. So getting your team staffed up, getting your team, full complement of staff will help reduce the burnout factor.
It will. And you also look at, I know I'm on my local school board, education. There's a big struggle to retain certified and classified employees in education right now too, which is a whole different layer of burnout, which we could do a whole nother session on, but we are about out of time, Darren. So I want to thank you very much. It was a fantastic presentation, and we'll make sure to get this out to everybody tomorrow. And we thank you all for attending, and Darren, especially thank you and Engage to Excel Recruitment Solutions.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Thanks, Kevin. Have a nice day.
Have a good one. Okay. Bye now.